Glorious devotees, thank you for returning to another presentation on Śrī Jīva Gosvāmī's Sandarbhas. Today we'll begin a discussion of the Bhagavat Sandarbha, which continues with the ontology, or the knowable. That is that which is knowable, based on our Gaudiya perspective. As we know, our Gaudiya perspective is based upon the primary evidence of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, this second Sandarbha, the Bhagavat Sandarbha, is about Bhagavān. So not to be confused with the term Bhagavat Sandarbha with the A on the end, which represents the entirety of the Sandarbhas, which is a treatise on the Srimad Bhagavatam. This sub-Sandarbha, Bhagavat Sandarbha, is dealing with one aspect of the Vedanta verse, which we will begin with by way of introduction. And then we will go through a short introduction to the Bhagavat Sandarbha itself, what's going to be presented there, and proceed to looking to a few of the anuchedas, or sections, and the subjects of those. In trying to prepare for an overview of the Bhagavat Sandarbha, I have to say it was quite a daunting task, because the literature itself presents such a mine of transcendental information, and just one anucheda or gemstone, or a vein of gemstones after another, bringing out all these philosophical truths, the various tattvas, which the Srimad Bhagavatam has to offer us. So it makes it quite difficult for someone like myself to go through and say, well, this is the most significant and that is the most significant. All this in preparation trying to get to the Krishna Sandarbha, which is the focus of this series of lectures. To get there, I want to give an overview of what's presented in the Bhagavat Sandarbha and then what's presented in the Paramatma Sandarbha, which constitute, as I said, a continuation of the prameya, what is knowable from the Gaudiya perspective, based primarily, those first three Sandarbhas, Tattva, Bhagavat, and Paramatma Sandarbha, based on the Vedanti verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So we'll go back to the Tattva Sandarbha, to the Mangalacharna, wherein the purpose and the seed concept of the Sandarbhas is presented in the 8th Anucheda. In one feature, Sri Krishna exists as pure consciousness without any manifest characteristics, and is referred to as Brahman in some portions of the Vedas. In another feature, he expands as the Purusha, who regulates the extrinsic potency, Maya, by his many plenary portions. In yet another of his principal forms, he is Narayan, resplendent in the spiritual sky, Vaikuntha. May that Sri Krishna, the original, complete, absolute truth, Swayam Bhagavān, bestow love for himself on those who worship his lotus feet in this world. Now this Mangalacharna verse, which is the seed conception of the entirety of the Sandarbhas, very much corresponds to two verses, and today in the Bhagavat Sandarbha we continue to the first of those two verses from the first canto of the Bhagavatam, Vedanti tat tattva vidas tattvam yash jnanamadvayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavaniti sabdyate. Learned transcendentalists who know the absolute truth call this non-dual substance Brahman, Paramatma, or Bhagavān. An introduction to the Bhagavat Sandarbha. True altruism lies not in merely taking care of the external persona of a living being. It lies in alleviating the ignorance that it is the root of everyone's disability in finding happiness. ignorance of one's true identity in relation to Bhagavan. To enlighten the ignorant and conditioned self is its true identity solves the eternal problem of happiness at its very root. The great seers of India illustrated this transcendental altruism by striving tirelessly to enlighten the masses. Among such luminaries, Śrī Jīva Gosvāmī is a brilliant moon who performed unparalleled welfare to humanity by presenting the essence of Vedic literature in the form of the Sandarbhas. Without the detailed guidance of a work like the Sandarbhas, a seeker of knowledge can easily get lost in the dense forest of Vedic literature, not knowing where to begin and how to pursue his spiritual life. It's worth reminding ourselves that the Gaudiya perspective on transcendence is very firmly rooted in the Vedic knowledge, and we've already covered to a large extent the significance of that foundation being the Srimad Bhagavatam. The Srimad Bhagavatam is based upon samadhi. It's a samadhi bhashya. It's based on revelation, the revelation of the author and the revelation of the speaker, from which all transcendental knowledge can be seen in its full glory. In other words, Srimad Bhagavatam illuminates all the Vedic literature. It illuminates all the Puranas. It illuminates all that has been provided for by Krishna Dvaipayana Vyas for the benefit of human society. Such profound knowledge has been so freely distributed by the mercy of Śrī Caitanya Mahaprabhu. And that's truly the central focus of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's dispensation. What's being spoken of here in this introduction? What is the best that can be done for humanity at large? And that is giving them the possibility of eternal happiness, which is enduring, which is not going to come to an end, like all the happiness that we experience within the material realm. So Jiva's contribution is significant in this regard. And it's significant because that son of the Bhagavat Purana, the Srimad Bhagavatam, is being properly mined, if we can continue with that analogy, by Jīva Gosvāmī, so that all of the subtleties of the dispensation of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu can be fully understood. This perspective on transcendence, which allows entrance into the most intimate attainment in spiritual practice, that of prema bhakti, or unalloyed loving devotion for the Supreme, which far exceeds even the concepts of liberation as presented in the Vedas themselves. Beginning with the Bhagavat Sandarbha, the introduction continues, Jīva Gosvāmī elaborates on the topic of ontology, Sambandha Gyan. He begins this volume by establishing reality as the non-dual absolute substantive, existing most completely as Bhagavān, the transcendent supreme person. So here we have non-dual absolute substantive. Vedanti tat-tattva vidas tattvamyas jnanam advayam. Jnanam advayam, that non-dual absolute. It can be seen differently, but now Jīva Gosvāmī is going to allow us, beginning with this Bhagavat Sandarbha, to understand that absolute reality from the highest perspective as illuminated by the Bhagavat Purana. The central theme of Jīva Gosvāmī's discussion in Bhagavat Sandarbha is based upon the second line of the famous verse from the Bhagavat Purana, Knowers of the Absolute describe it as non-dual consciousness, naming it as Brahman, as Paramatma, and as Bhagavān. The specific sequence of nouns used in this verse, Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavān, indicates the increasing importance and completeness of each succeeding manifestation. When one realizes the absolute truth without perceiving any distinction between its energies and the absolute itself as energetic source, it is called Brahman. When through deeper intuitive insight, one apprehends a distinction between the energies and the energetic source, but perceives this distinction only in relation to phenomenal energies, the world and the living entities within it, the reality thus realized is called Paramatma. When one's discernment of the distinction between energy and energetic source moves still deeper to include the internal transcendental energies of reality, one begins to perceive reality as Bhagavān. Just an elaboration of what's there in Vedanti Tattva Vidas. These different perceptions of the same non-dual absolute, different degrees of appreciation. And here an example is given in the introduction to bring this more to light for our benefit. For example, the phrase blue lotus has three components. Lotus, the noun itself, a substance unqualified by any adjective. Blue, the adjective qualifying the noun. And three, the complete phrase blue lotus, a qualified substance. There is no real difference between lotus and blue lotus except that the former does not convey any specific features, whereas the latter clearly states its color. The distinction between Brahman and Bhagavān is similar. Śrī Jīva explains that when the Absolute is perceived as unqualified, as Brahman, it amounts to bare awareness of the substantive prior to the specification of its intrinsic nature. At this stage, it is known as Visesha, or that which is yet to be defined. The energies that adhere in the Absolute are its qualifiers, Visesana. When the same Absolute is perceived as inclusive of its intrinsic power, i.e. as Bhagavān, it amounts to complete awareness of the substantive as a qualified entity, Visista. The way of perceiving any object can start in a very unqualified way, as the example used, a lotus, and then we can have a blue lotus, a red lotus, or a white lotus. We're further qualifying the subject. All of the Lord's various energies, when seen in relationship with Him, add the nuances of what is a complete understanding of His position. If one realizes Bhagavān, one will naturally understand Brahman, just as one who beholds a blue lotus automatically sees a lotus. This is why Śrī Jīva did not dedicate a separate Sandarbha to Brahman. Whatever is essential to know about Brahman is contained in Bhagavat Sandarbha. So if we understand Bhagavān, we automatically understand Brahman. We automatically understand Paramatma. Although there is no absolute difference between the three aspects of the one absolute reality, Jiva's evaluation is that Bhagavān is the most complete manifestation, Purna Avirbhav, replete with unparalleled, variegated potencies. In comparison to Bhagavān, Brahman and Paramatma are incomplete manifestations of the one absolute reality. The realization of Bhagavān naturally includes that of Brahman, but not vice versa. The Bhagavat Sandarbha proceeds to a further elaboration on the nature of Bhagavan, revealing the transcendental character of his form, name, abode, devotees, activities, and his superiority over Brahman. Really, what we have here in this beginning section of 4 books of the Sandarbhas, the Tattva, Bhagavat, Paramatma, and Krishna Sandarbha, is a full elaboration on the nature of the Supreme Absolute Truth. The Bhagavat Sandarbha is giving us a general presentation of Bhagavan and his characteristics, his intrinsic nature, his devotees, his abodes, in a general way. Then how the Lord interfaces with his external potency through the Paramatma feature, and then the specificity of Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam will be completely unpacked in the Krishna Sandarbha. Acintya-bhedābheda-vāda, the school of trans-rational, above material rational capacity to fully apprehend or understand spontaneous oneness and distinction. Śrī Jīva Gosvāmī stresses that Bhagavan's energies have 2 important features, that of trans-rational and intrinsic to him. Since they are trans-rational, the energies of reality are ultimately inscrutable and not fully within the grasp of human thought and reason. Trans-rational also indicates that these energies can accomplish logically impossible feats. Another import of trans-rational is that the relationship between these energies and their energetic source is not entirely within the grasp of logic. These energies are not distinct from the energetic, but also not entirely identical to him. It is by virtue of this understanding that the philosophy of Śrī Caitanya has become known as Acintya-bhedābheda-vāda, or Vāda. The Sarup Shakti. The internal energy of Bhagavan also has 3 aspects: existence, Sandini, awareness, Samvit, and bliss, Ladini. The Sandini potency is the intrinsic power of existence of the self-existent Bhagavan, and it upholds the existence of the individual Atmas and nature. The Samvit potency is the power of knowledge of Bhagavan by which he is all-knowing and which enables all others to know. The Hladini potency is the power of bliss, which bestows bliss both to Bhagavan, who is inherently full of bliss, and to others. These 3 aspects of the internal potency are the very nature of Bhagavan and thus exist eternally in him. The Samvit potency includes and supersedes the Sandini potency, and the Hladini potency includes and supersedes the other 2. This threefold internal energy of Bhagavan constitutes his very nature and that of his abode and associates. This is an interesting concept to understand that of all the internal Satchitananda, the internal potencies of the Lord, that the Ananda portion or potency, the Hladini, supersedes the other 2, that of knowledge and that of existence itself. Love conquers all. What can we say? Coming to an end here of the introduction, Jiva Goswāmī establishes that the form of Bhagavan is not material like that of human beings. It is spiritual and consists of existence, consciousness, and bliss, Satchitananda Rupatva. Such a form cannot be cognized by ordinary material senses, and yet it is self-revealed by the trans-rational potency of Bhagavan. We just discussed the fact that it's beyond our comprehension. It's beyond our material ability to fully understand the nature of this transcendent entity and his various potencies. We can't get there with material senses, and yet it can reveal itself to us. Yet it is self-revealed by the trans-rational potency. So the Swarup Shakti, the internal potency of Bhagavan himself, can reveal itself to us in so many ways, even despite our entanglement within the external material potency. Unlike mortal beings, the form of Bhagavan is not different from his essential nature. Although the form of Bhagavan is one, it can manifest in unlimited places in infinite aspects simultaneously in direct correspondence to the mood of his devotees. The realization of Bhagavan, together with the various unique characteristics constituting him as the essence of ultimate reality, is said to be perfect and complete. Such complete and perfect realization of Bhagavan is possible only through bhakti. Bhakti is that potency which allows the self-revelation of the nature of the Supreme. And as we know, bhakti is completely independent. And bhakti is also making herself available to us through the agency of the sadhus. To realize the full benefit of bhakti, one must have a clear conceptual understanding of Bhagavan without any lingering doubts. Thus we have the Sandarbhas. Thus we have the further elaborations. We have the glorious commentaries on the Srimad Bhagavatam by the sadhus. We have the elaborations on the Srimad Bhagavatam, again, the sun upon which all this transcendental knowledge revolves, coming out. Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the core seminal texts within our tradition, and all the additional texts that are coming out to further explain this transcendental knowledge according to our time, our place, our circumstance, so that we can apprehend what the Bhagavat Purana has to offer, which is a complete entrance into an understanding of these transcendental potencies of the Supreme, headed by the Lord's unlimited happiness, Hladini. Now, by way of looking at what's presented in the Bhagavat Purana, we've pulled out a few of the anuchetas or sections. So here we are going to see pages of the complete table of contents of the book. And then I've highlighted different things that I've pulled out from that table of contents to highlight the glory of the Bhagavat Purana. And as you look through these table of contents, which I hope you do as we go on here, you'll see there's so much to be explored here because he unpacks all of these various things in a very, very significant way, as you'll see by just the little glimpses that I'm able to present in these classes, which are an overview. We're going to start by looking at the very first anucheta a little bit in depth. Absolute reality manifests in three different ways. Again, a little unpacking of the Vedanta verse. So we'll begin there. When I have presented anything, I want to remind you that these are just small sections of the section. The word anucheta means section. So they're small sections of the anucheta, a little bit of the essence. It's fully unpacked in the work itself, and I encourage you, as your time and study allows, to dive and take a deep dive into Jiva Goswami's works, the Sandarbhas. From the first anucheta, the first part of Srimad Bhagavatam 1-11 describes absolute reality in a general manner, characterized as non-dual consciousness. Then the second part elaborates the absolute more specifically. This non-dual consciousness is referred to as Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavān. This one non-dual absolute thus manifests its own existence in one of these three aspects in exact accordance with the specific qualification of the worshipper. And again, we're reminded that this one non-dual absolute manifests itself, makes itself available according to the specific qualification of the worshipper. Ye yata man prapajante is what Sri Krishna said to Arjuna. All of them, as they surrender unto me, as they conceive of me, I make myself available to them. I reveal myself according to their degree of surrender and their conceptions regarding who I am. Now, there'll be more on that conceptualization later here. So a little bit from the commentary. After introducing absolute reality in a general way as non-dual consciousness in Tattva Sandarbha, Śrī Jīva Gosvāmī now begins Bhagavat Sandarbha with a more specific description. The words Brahma, Paramatma, and Bhagavān in Sutta's verse denote not only the one non-dual absolute in 3 degrees of completion, but also 3 degrees of completion in surrender. The same non-dual absolute is revealed and thus interpreted either as Brahman, Paramatma, or Bhagavān in accordance with the core disposition of surrender, shaped in no small measure by the theory and praxis adopted by the adherents of different paths. We can grasp as we enter deeper into hearing from the sadhus in our tradition and to enter more deeply into our own personal practice and the revelations that are received ourselves by that hearing and by that practice and by the holy name itself, we can understand the extraordinary yadrichaya, good fortune that we have had in coming in contact with this conception of the supreme absolute truth. There's nothing that you can do to attain this conception that is presented in Gaudiya Vaishnavism of your own accord. It is coming by the extreme mercy which is descending from the transcendental realm through the agency of the sadhus. And specifically now, in this most fallen age of man, the most intimate of that understanding, the most intimate nature of that supreme personality, Bhagavan Sri Krishna, is made available through the dispensation of Śrī Caitanya Mahaprabhu. So the theory and praxis that's being spoken of here and the path that we are on as Gaudiya Vaishnava, it's why we hear of those devotees as they advance in the stage of ruchi, where they developed such a deep taste for the practice, and that ruchi maturing into a sakti, where the deep appreciation of what the object of the practice is and a relationship with that object, Sri Krishna, and the way that develops, why devotees advancing to that stage, when they just chant the holy name, they break down. How could this good fortune come upon me? There's nothing that can be done to attain this kind of a theory and this kind of a praxis except the dispensation of Sri Caitanya coming into the world and somehow, by some good fortune, which is outside of whatever we could do to attain it, is coming to us. As we fully grasp the depth and understanding and begin to appreciate the nature of that, all we can do is weep in joy as to what we're receiving. A little bit more from the commentary on this first Anucheta. Krishna reveals in Bhagavad Gita, I reveal myself to all who surrender unto me exactly in accordance with the essential nature of their surrender. Yatha, or in accordance with the essential nature in this statement, signifies the inner disposition of the devotee, the mode of worship, the devotee's conceptual outlook in regard to Bhagavan's form, and similar factors that contribute to and define the nature of the surrender undertaking. There are different transcendentalists, and different transcendentalists will see the same supreme absolute as Brahman, as Bhagavan, or as Paramatma, depending on the nature of that dispensation which has come to them through the Lord's internal potencies, descending to the material realm. This is confirmed by Sri Brahma in his prayer, the same idea. O Master, you take your seat in the lotus heart that has been made worthy of you through love, prema. Even so, the way to reach you can be understood through hearing. Out of kindness toward your devotees, O greatly glorified Lord, you take the very form they meditate on and appear to them in that way. In the stage of sadhana bhakti, we are hearing from the Guru, from the sadhus, from the entirety of the parampara, which is molding our conception of the supreme absolute reality. We as Gaudiyas, we have a window of opportunity coming to us, and other transcendentalists have their windows of opportunity. So as they surrender, as they develop their conceptual orientation of that supreme reality, that window becomes more and more open and available through their sadhana, their association. This point being made here is extremely significant because someone could come away with a misunderstanding. Well, I can think of God in whatever way I want. As I conceive God, that's the way I'll experience God. But no, as explained here, of course, this last statement does not mean that one can meditate on any form and that Bhagavan is thereby bound to appear to the meditator in that way. This idea is precluded by the phrase Śrī-Caitanya-bhedābheda-vāda. The way to reach you can be understood through hearing. One has to hear from a qualified source and should meditate on the forms that are described in these authorized texts. So in other words, yes, the Lord does make himself available through the dispensation, and that's where we began today in our discussion, that this descent and this doing the best that can be done for the benefit of humanity, as exemplified by Srila Vyasadeva and his discontent, as exemplified by Sukadeva Goswami showing up at the most opportune time for the benefit of Maharaj Parikshit, by the example in our own lives of our coming into contact with the sadhus, with the bona fide spiritual master, and how our own lives have been opened up to transcendence by this transcendent via media. But they provide us with the path, patha, Śrī-Caitanya-bhedābheda-vāda, authorized path available, which is descending from the transcendental realm. Not that we, from our mind-body complex, can come up with any concocted idea regarding transcendence and pursue that and expect that to be attainable. No, that's not an attainment. That's what we would commonly refer to as a hallucination. No, this is a descending process, and we are being introduced to a conception of the Supreme Absolute Truth, whether that conception comes through the opportunities afforded us as Brahman, as Paramatma, or as Bhagavān. All these conceptions are coming down through authorized channels of transcendent dispensation of the Lord's internal Swarup Shakti. This is also again fortified in Bhagavad Gita. The yogi who meditates on Paramatma, God as the immanent absolute, is superior to the ascetic. He is regarded as superior even to the jnanis, the adherents of Brahman, and also to those who follow scriptures with material motive. Therefore, Arjuna, be a yogi. And of all yogis, he who, endowed with faith, worships me with his heart, mind, attention fully absorbed in me is, in my opinion, the greatest of all transcendentalists. This is Krishna's conclusion. This is the meditation that if you can meditate on Paramatma, that's a great yogi. And then he goes on to tell Arjuna, but of all yogis, if you can actually meditate on me as you're seeing me here before you, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that, in my opinion, is the topmost. That aspiration makes one the greatest transcendentalist. So this discussion on the next Anucheta, the distinction between Brahman and Bhagavān, I am going to go into some detail there. Then after that, a complete discussion on the manifestation of Brahman. The seventh Anucheta is itself the Brahman Sandarbha. We'll see in that discussion and looking in detail at that entire Anucheta, the glory of how Jiva Gosvāmī pulls these insights from the various verses of the Bhagavat Purana. So I'll wrap up today's discussion. Sincerely thank you for your attention and association, and hope that this has nourished your understanding in some way. Vanchakalpadubhascha, Kripasindavevacha, Patitanam, Pamanabhyo, Vaishnavijya Namo Namaha.
Krishna Kirtana Gana Natana Pano Prema